Hello, and welcome to Vivork. I'm Brian Watrous. This is the 7th in a 10-part video series in which we're exploring how to build a vCenter Orchestrator environment on top of VMware Fusion. In the previous video, we saw how to install the vSphere client, and now in this video, we'll see how to install the vCenter Server virtual appliance. In a few moments, we'll demonstrate how to install the vCenter Server virtual appliance. The steps involved are, step 1, we're going to deploy the vCenter Server virtual appliance onto our first host, ESXi01. Then we'll configure vCenter to boot whenever that host boots. The third step will be to configure other aspects of vCenter Server. And then in step 4, we'll configure the vCenter inventory. To install the vCenter Server virtual appliance, we'll begin by launching the vSphere client. And in the vSphere client, we'll log into our first host, ESXi01. You'll recall that's the larger of the two hosts, the one that has 5 gigabytes of memory. We'll log in as the account root, and with the password capital V, capital M, WARE, 1, bang. Then we'll click the login button. As you can see, I'm using the 60-day evaluation license. I'll click OK to dismiss this message. And then to kick off the installation of the vCenter Server virtual appliance, I'll go to the File menu and select Deploy OVF Template. In the deployment, the first question that we're asked is to specify where the OVA file is that contains the virtual appliance. You can see I already have the file name in the deployment wizard here, but I'm going to click Browse so that you can see exactly the whole path. So I'll click Browse. My OVA file is in my Z:" drive. You'll recall that's the file share between my Windows 7 VM and Mac OS X. So Z:, Documents, Virtual Machines, ISOs and OVFs, vSphere 5.5 Update 1A, vCenter, and here's my OVA file, which I'll select, and then I'll click Open. Then we click the Next button, and here you can see a screen where we see a summary of some of the aspects of the installation that's about to take place. We'll continue by clicking the Next button. I'm going to rename my virtual appliance VCVA. Then I'll click Next. And very important step here, we need to make certain that we select thin provision in order to conserve disk space. So we select thin provision and click Next. And we have a summary screen telling us about the installation that's about to take place. I'm going to check the checkbox labeled Power On After Deployment, and then I'll click Finish. The vCenter Server virtual appliance has now been successfully deployed, so we'll click the Close button. And if we go over here to the host inventory and click the plus sign, we can see that the vCenter Server virtual appliance is running. That's because we checked that checkbox a few moments ago. Now, while that checkbox is handy and gets the virtual machine booted after it's deployed, that only applies that one time. What I want to do next is to configure the vCenter Server virtual appliance, or rather, configure the host so that the vCenter Server virtual appliance always boots whenever host ESXi01 boots. So I'll begin by selecting the host, and then I'll go over to the Configuration tab. I'll scroll down past the Hardware section and into the Software section, where we see a link labeled Virtual Machine Startup Shutdown. So we'll click Virtual Machine Startup Shutdown. And as you can see here, the vCenter Server virtual appliance is currently configured in such a way that it has to be manually started. And that's what we want to change. So to make the change, we'll go to the Properties link. And we're going to tell this host that it should allow virtual machines to start and stop automatically when the host starts. And furthermore, to speed things up a bit, I'll go ahead and use the two-minute delay in between virtual machines. I only have one virtual machine. But in case I have more virtual machines later on, so that I don't necessarily have to wait that full 2 minutes, I'm going to check the checkbox labeled Continue Immediately if VMware Tools starts. Okay, so we're almost there, but we've got the key step to do here, which is to select the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance. We're going to click Move Up once, twice, so that the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance is now configured to start whenever host ESXi01 starts. We'll click OK. Now, the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance has been deployed, and we've begun the configuration, but there's more configuration that we need to do. So let's check in on vCVA. If we go to the Summary tab, we can see that the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance is up and running, and it's running at IP address .130. Now I'm going to click the Open Console button so that we can peek inside the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance, and notice this URL that it's specifying. The URL contains the IP address that we just saw, plus some other stuff around it, such as HTTPS and port number 5480. Now, that's not the IP address that I ultimately want for my vCenter server. That's a dynamically assigned IP address. What we are going to do, not just yet, but what we will do is change that IP address to the static IP address that our DNS server knows about. But for right now, that dynamically assigned IP address is fine. So what we'll do is we'll start a browser. I'm going to start Chrome. And in Chrome, I'm going to go to that URL, https://172.16.245.130:port 5480, which is the port number that the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance configuration utility runs on. So I'll hit Enter here. As before, we're using self-signed certificates. I'm just going to click Proceed anyway. And I'm now at a login prompt where I'm going to log in as root. But since this is the first time that we've logged into the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance, it's currently configured for its default password, which is all lowercase letters, VMWARE. So VMware in lowercase letters. We'll change that to our capital V, capital M, where 1 password later on. But for now, we'll click Login. We have an end-user license agreement to read and accept, so we'll check the checkbox to accept it. Then we'll click the Next button. And as you can see at the top of the screen here, there's a message that says that one way to change the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance to use a static IP address would be to cancel out of this wizard, go change it manually on the Network tab, which ultimately we are going to do. We're going to go to that Network tab, but rather than allow this to bomb out of the wizard, I'm going to let the wizard go ahead and continue to use that statically assigned IP address, the dynamically assigned IP address. I'm going to let the wizard configure this vCenter Server Virtual Appliance with default settings, and then after that's all done, I'll change the IP address. In the meantime, we select Configure with Default Settings, then we click the Next button. Here we see information about the installation that's just about, the configuration that's about to take place. We'll click Start, and the wizard will configure our vCenter Server Virtual Appliance. And the configuration wizard is done. As you can see, one of its last messages, it said that it was starting the vCenter server. Let's click Close, and then we'll verify that indeed the vCenter server is running. Then we click Close. We go to the vCenter Server tab, then click on Summary. And it looks like vCenter server is running, the inventory service is running. Down on the bottom, we see that vSphere Autodeploy is not running. That's simply because we haven't configured it. The other services such as the web client's running, log browser's running, ESXi dump collector and syslog collector are running. Currently it says that Active Directory integration is disabled, which for my purposes is actually okay. says that the SSO infrastructure is running. A few more items here. And we can see the inventory service is running, the database is running, pretty much everything's running. We do have a few issues, again, time synchronization and Active Directory being potentially the most important of those, but for right now I'm going to let those slide. Instead, what I'm going to do is go to the Network tab, where I want to change the IP address. As you can see, it's currently using a DHCP assigned IP address. I'm going to change that by going to Address, and then we'll select, instead of DHCP, we'll select to have our IPv4 address assigned statically, which allows us to configure a whole bunch about that vCenter Server Virtual Appliance, including its host name. The default gateway that we see here is correct, so I'll leave that alone. I don't have a IPv6 gateway, so I'll leave that blank. The DNS server that it picked up is not correct, so I'll change that to .1. I don't have an alternate DNS server, so I'll leave that alone. Since we're configuring statically, we get to set the IP address of the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance, and to make it match my DNS settings, I'm going to set it to 172.16.245.103, and then that mask is 255.255.255.0. I'm going to click Save Settings. As you can see, it says it's saving the network settings, but I seem to recall that it will sit here indefinitely because it hasn't redirected to .103. So let's just double check that here. So as you can see, I've gone over to the console of the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance, and it's already at .103. So looks like the redirect that could take place here is not going to. So I'll just manually change this to .103, and we'll strip off this number of, /# network address business. I'll go ahead and say leave this page. So since this is the first time that we're going to the .103 interface, we're receiving a message about a self-signed certificate. We'll click proceed anyway. And once again, we're greeted by the login screen where we are going to type root once again, and since we still haven't set the password, we're going to type the default password, which is VMWARE, all lowercase letters. Then we'll click the login button. Now it's starting to bug me that that password is still at its default. That's clearly a bad idea from a security perspective. So we're going to go over to the admin tab. And currently the password is set to VMware, all lowercase letters. I'm going to change that to capital VM, so capital V, capital M, WARE1 bang. I'll confirm that new password. And though it's perhaps not a great idea from a security perspective, I don't want my admin password expiring, so I'm going to say no. At that point, I'll click Submit. Let it update that password. Looks like it's made the change, and we'll just test this out by clicking Logout. We'll log back in as root with the new password, capital V, capital M, WARE1 bang. We'll click Login, and we've now changed the password. So having made those changes, we'll once again log out of the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance configuration utility. And we'll go ahead and close the browser entirely. And this time, instead of logging into the host, ESXi01, we're going to log out of that host entirely, because we now have a new vCenter Server Virtual Appliance, and that's what we're going to log into. So we'll do so by launching the vSphere client. And in the vSphere client, we're not going to log into ESXi01, but rather we're going to log into vcva.vwork.info as the account root with our new password, capital V, capital M, WARE1 bang. We'll click Login. I'm going to ignore the message here. The message that we're receiving here is simply an artifact of the fact that I've installed the vSphere client previously on this system. I'm going to go ahead and say yes here. You most likely won't have seen that last message. So we're logging into the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance. And once again, we're using a 60-day eval license. I'll click OK to dismiss that message. And what we're going to do here, first of all, I won't remember the name localhost, so I'm going to right-click localhost and change the name here to vcva.vvork.info. That's just for cosmetic purposes. Then I'm going to add a data center to my vCenter server. I'm going to choose, just because I want this lab environment for training purposes, I'm going to call my data center training. Obviously, you can call your data center something else. Then after having created the training data center, I'm going to right-click that data center and choose to add one of my hosts. The host name is esxi01.vvork.info. The username is root. The password is capital V, capital M, WARE, 1 bang. We'll click the next button. And the window that pops up is about the SHA1 thumbprint. That's the thumbprint from the host. It identifies the host. I'm going to click yes to accept that thumbprint. And then basically I just need to hit the next button a whole bunch of times. But on the screen here, notice that the host adding wizard knows that there's a virtual machine on this host that we're adding. So there's our vCenter Server Virtual Appliance that's on the first host. We'll click next. I'm going to use no license for this host. In other words, it's going to be in 60-day evaluation mode. We'll click next. I'm not going to lock down the host. I'll simply click next. We have a message here on this screen telling us where any virtual machines that currently exist on this host are going to be placed in the vCenter server inventory. So they're going to go into the training data center. We'll click next. We have a summary screen. So we double check the summary screen. That looks good. So we'll click the finish button. And then the vCenter server begins adding that host. Now currently this host is just a standalone host. It's not part of a cluster, but later on if we wanted to, we could certainly create a cluster. So as you can see, we're 85% of the way through adding this host. And to fill up this time a little bit, I'll tell you that the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to add the second host. Even though there's no virtual machines on it yet, we may as well add it. But here's the first host that we just added, and it's one virtual machine. What we're going to do next is right-click the data center and choose to add another host. This time the host is the second host, esxi02.vvork.info. Once again, username root, password capital V, capital M, WARE, 1 bang. We'll click next. We'll accept the thumbprint. Click next. There's no virtual machines on that host yet. That's fine. Shortly in the next video, we'll install the vCenter Orchestrator server onto that host. But for now, we'll simply click next. We'll go with the evaluation mode once again. We'll click next. We're not going to lock down the host, so we'll click next. The virtual machines from this host are going to also go into the training data center. We'll click next. We have a summary screen. We double check things. Looks good. We click the finish button. And now the second host is being added to the vCenter server. Now, the second host has been added. We now have a up and running, fully functional vCenter server virtual appliance that has 2 hosts added to it. One of those hosts happens to have the vCenter server virtual appliance itself. But do stick around for the next video, because in the next video we're going to add the vCenter Orchestrator virtual appliance to the second host. See you then.